You've talked to your parents and you both decide it's time to transition to an assisted living facility. What are the questions that you should be asking?
On this episode of Secure Your Retirement, we are going to walk through a scenario that we just had in our office when one of our clients asked that specific question, how do I help my parents? We hope you enjoy the show. I do want to say this, that Merce and I, our goal with this show is to make sure that we answer as many questions as we possibly can so that you do have a retirement that you feel secure with and that you truly have peace of mind. If there are ever any questions that you would like to have us answer on the podcast, please reach out to us. We have set up a way for you to be able to text us directly. The text number is 984-207-1753. If you send us a text with your question, we'll try our best to make sure that we handle all of our listeners' questions in the podcast. We hope you enjoy the show. Well, we're happy to have you with us for our podcast today. We really today wanted to take you through a story that Merce and I are hearing more and more in our practice. And this is a very specific one that we're going to walk through, but this is not uncommon for us at all. So I'm going to kind of set up the situation, and then we're going to have Merce talk to us a little bit about what we would do with the numbers aspect. But here's what happened. We had a client of ours come to us, and he is about 60 years of age, and he basically wanted to talk to us about his dad. And the situation is his dad is around 85 years of age, and he lives in another state, and he has gotten to the point where he's no longer able, or let's say this, he no longer is in a position that he thinks he should be living on his own. So what he's doing is he's talking to his dad, and his dad is actually realizing he needs to have some assistance. And so the whole question is moving him to North Carolina, but his dad also still wants to be independent, meaning he doesn't want to live with his son. He's not in that place. So he kind of needs a little bit of assistance, but don't want to be living with his son. So that's, by the way, we hear that story all the time. So that's the scenario. And so what the son is doing, our client, is he's looking at different areas around the area, different communities that are assisted living. He doesn't need nursing home care. He's nowhere close to that yet, but he does need assisted living. And so he's looking at different places that his dad could go and stay in an assisted living. Now, his dad says, I don't know how all the numbers on this work completely. He knows some. He had done some research in California, the other state, but now he wants to figure it out here. And so what we did is we basically sat with our client and said, okay, let's walk through the numbers. Let's look at the numbers of an assisted living. Now, this is different than what we talked about in a previous episode, which is called a CCRC. They have independent living, and then you move into assisted living. In this particular situation, the dad needs to go into assisted living right now. He's going to need a little bit of assistance right now. And so, Merce, could you just kind of walk us through kind of what we need to know in order to help put together some numbers in this situation for the son and his dad?
Yeah. So it comes down to affordability. And so there's a few different things that we need to understand. On one side, we have to understand the cost of making this transition into assisted living. And then on the other side, we have to understand, well, basically the assets. Where's the money going to come from to cover these costs? And so we talked to the client and got a better understanding, knowing that we're not actually talking to the person that's going to be moving in to the assisted living facility. So what we need to know is, what are his assets at the time, or what are your assets at the time? If we're just talking to a client, what type of vehicles do we have? Is there 401k money? Is there IRA money? Is there cash in the bank? Are there other taxable investments? And so getting a good idea of that. And then on top of that, understanding cash flow, because a lot of these places, the way they work is there may be a buy-in, and then of course there's going to be a monthly, you could almost look at it as a rent, and it's going to be more than what a mortgage used to be back when you maybe own that house. So we have to understand, where is the money coming in currently? The fixed income sources like Social Security. Are they drawing that already? Is there a pension involved? Is there any other income sources like rental property, investment income, everything like that? Just so we can get a good idea of how the monthly note for being in an assisted living type facility is going to be covered. Then, so in this case, there's a relocation that's happening. So the client's dad lives out of state, and at some point, there's going to be a house that is sold once all this is finalized to move into North Carolina. So we have to understand, well, is there anything that's going to come out of the house? Is there enough equity? Are there proceeds coming from the house that are going to come into basically become a cash asset that can be used for the rental or the down payment into the assisted living facility? And then the other piece is how much the level of care that is needed. So assisted living has different levels of care, and ultimately that means there's different rates that you come in at, which can be a huge game changer as well when it comes to your monthly note in that area. So we kind of talk all that through with the client, and then that gives them a way to have that conversation with their dad to fully understand all of that, and then as we get more specifics in, we can go back and forth and ultimately, hopefully, make a good decision there.
Yeah. So now with the assisted living, there's a couple of misconceptions I think that are out there when it comes to these different things. Like, for example, somebody thinks about a nursing home and think, okay, well, they're going to take all of the assets. They don't take anything. With an assisted living, they're not taking anything as well. It's basically how are we going to pay for it? Now, here's the thing that we had to think through as we started looking at this on these numbers. So Merce talked about cash flow. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, that means what's his pension, what's his Social Security, and then what are the assets and what could they generate in income? Now, in an assisted living, if we're not in a scenario of needing a lot of care, you could find places, and let's just use a number, let's just say around $2,500 to $3,000 a month to be able to be in an assisted living, a place that has ability to check in or to make sure that the person's okay. Basically, they're somewhat independent, but they need a little bit of assistance here or there. Now, included in that many times are some meals, some food plans that are included in on that. So when we start looking at those numbers, it might be a higher thing. So maybe the person's they don't have rent now. Maybe their house is paid for. But when you look at the fact that pretty much at this phase of life, when they need assisted living, once they get to that point, there's not the travel there that you had before. There's not going to be the food expense because that's taken care of. And so when we start looking at it, it's not usually this scenario that you have to have a tremendous amount of money to be able to move into an assisted living. You do have to have some assets in the sense of being able to make that cash flow. So what we started looking at in this particular case is the dad does have some savings. He does have some money. When he sells his house that's paid for, he's going to have some more money. So when you took the Social Security and you took the small pension and then some savings, living in assisted living was not an issue from a monetary standpoint. Now, there were other things. There were things like, okay, would my dad like this particular location? What are some of the things that it offers? And in that particular location, some of the locations, they had great avenues for association and for different things that they can do when we get through the coronavirus scenario. So when they started looking at all this, it really was a very nice environment. Now we do, in this particular case, there was openings within the assisted living. This particular scenario, again, is not like the CCRCs that we've talked about, the continuous care retirement communities where you go in independent, buy in, and then transition into assisted living. He is going to be going into assisted living, completely different environment, but certainly very doable. And I think that one of the things that I want to make sure that is clear is that we are seeing this more and more and more where the children, and I say children that are, in their 60s and 70s are helping their parents that are in their 80s and 90s make these transitions. And there is some emotional part of this. The dad in this situation was completely open, completely understood it, did not want to move in with his children, does not want to go into even a shared home with his children. He said, no, I want to be on my own and my own independence. And this type of facility had his own apartment. He would have had his own kitchen, so he was able to have a good level of independence. And so it worked out very nice. Now, I think Merce, we were kind of thinking about this whole story. There is a difference, and we've talked about this again in a previous episode, but sometimes somebody's planning for this ahead of needing assisted living. So Merce, can you kind of walk us through what that scenario looks like? Very similar, but a little bit different.
Yeah. So we just recently had an episode where we talked about CCRC's, continuing care retirement communities, and not long ago we had a client come to us and basically said, I'm 70 now, we're healthy now, we like where we live, but we know that at some point we are going to have to transition into one of these places before it's too late. The big thing about these communities is that the wait list can be anywhere from 5 to 15 years, depending on what type of uh, uh, house or apartment that you're trying to get. So he wanted to go ahead and start having that conversation. And what's nice in this situation is that he is our client, so we know a lot of the specifics. What we didn't know though is all of the specifics as far as the different communities in the area. So what he did was basically he brought us all the research. By the way, he's basically a mathematician, scientist background, so very analytical. And loves to work with numbers. We have a very robust software where we can pretty much make any type of hypothetical and get it pretty close. So what he wanted to do is evaluate the different ones in the Raleigh Cary area. So he basically broke it down to three tiers. One that you would consider the top level tier that's going to be very expensive, a mid grade, and then a lower level, all of which are still all highly rated CCRCs. But he kind of wanted to get an idea of what they can afford and then what he's willing to spend. Because at the end of the day, he still wants to leave something behind for the beneficiaries. So he wanted to understand that cash flow there. So once again, a couple of things that we had to think through, somewhat similar, is what is going to be the monthly cost to transition into any one of these tiers that he brought to us, and then also what type of buy-in are we going to be doing? Is it going to be a couple $100,000? Is it going to be 500,000? Some of them are as much as $700,000 to buy in. It all depends on how you want to play it out. So we kind of went through a couple of different iterations there. And then another thing is that we have to know, well, when, and we don't know the answer because you get on a wait list and you wait until your name is called. And so we have to put in at some point a time in the future that we're guessing that we may get our name called to move into the CCRC or at least start the process. So at the time he's 70 and he said, well, I think would be happy to go in at 80. And so we're forecasting 10 years from now. So basically the retirement plan is still the same. Everything is the same. But once we hit 80, all of a sudden the monthly expenses start to change based off of the CCRC. From what he brought, there's a lot of information out there. So they'll tell you the inflation rate of what their expenses are and everything like that. So we're able to extrapolate 10 years forward and get a good understanding of what his cash flow is going to have to be to move into one of these places. So we kind of walk down the line. We take him through scenario A, B, and C. And then ultimately he gets to decide his comfort level. And it actually turned out that his name was called earlier than expected. So now the process that we're in is he has decided on one of the CCRCs, and it's still about 5 years out. So it looks like he's going to move in at the age of 75 versus 80, which was fine with him. Because they know they need to make this transition. And now the question we're walking through is, the particular place that he chose is a place that needs a down payment. And so multiple meetings on walking through the scenarios, and then another couple meetings on walking through, well, where's this money going to come from? Because they don't take it all up front. They'll maybe take 10% down payment one year, and then 40 another year, and then the remaining 50 another year. So you kind of get to break it up. So now that turns into a conversation of, well, how do we do this? Where do we take the money from? What's the most tax efficient way to do this? And so, the idea of moving into a CCRC, I think, can be very overwhelming. There's a lot of options out there. There's a lot of numbers that are thrown around. And honestly, there's a lot of emotional things to think about there too. And so being able to walk through the numbers, I think helped him tremendously make a decision for him and his wife that they were both comfortable with. So just a little story there to kind of take you through the process and what's available when you're working with someone like us that can kind of walk you through everything very objectively.
Yeah, so I think the wrap up here is that there are tools. There's tools that are out there that help us be able to make these decisions, help you to be able to see them clearly, and we encourage you that if you needed any of that, we certainly have the tools that we can share. I will say this, as we wrap up here, is that a couple things. For number one, we certainly appreciate you all listening and to the podcast. We've got a tremendous amount of good feedback. If you could, please make sure that you subscribe to the show. If you've not already done so, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. That certainly helps. But also, you can go to our website, which is pomwealth.net/podcast. And there you can get access to our 4 steps to secure your retirement. We walk through a lot of these scenarios and how to be able to plan. But this 4 steps to secure your retirement is a mini video series. You can be able to watch all 4 videos. They're not very long, about 10 to 15 minutes each, but it walks you through this whole thought process of getting ready for and living through retirement. We do appreciate you listening. We hope you have a great day.